Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me for episode 36 of Friday Book Bites. And I am very excited today to have with me Mary Lou Stevens. Hi, Mary Lou. How are you?
Hello from our lockdown to yours, Sandy.
I think half the country is in lockdown at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, yes, I'm so grateful to be here with you. Like so many authors in the last year and a half, my launches have been scrapped, cancelled, postponed maybe to some date in the future. Who knows? So I'm so grateful to be here. So thank you.
No, it's absolutely my pleasure to have you. And having been there last year, when my book came out right as a lockdown hit, I know exactly how you feel. But it is wonderful that we do at least have this medium to get out there and tell people about your gorgeous new book,
Thank
The
you.
Last of the Apple Blossoms. Congratulations on such a wonderful debut. There is some beautiful lyrical prose in here, a cracking good story. It's set in Tasmania in the apple orchards, and we'll get into the story a little bit later. But before we do, I just want to pop up the details of our giveaway. So for anyone who leaves a comment or asks a question, whether you're watching that live now or if you're watching this back a little bit later, the competition will stay open until midday on Saturday, Sydney time. You will go in the draw to win a copy of this gorgeous new book. But today we are talking about something that I think a lot of authors have in common, and that is the importance of having people behind us to spur us on. Writing is a fairly lonely pursuit, and without these people behind us, we probably wouldn't get there, I don't think. And you mentioned them as mentors and angels, Mary Lou.
Yeah. Yes. So it's specifically with this book, I have had a mentorship before for my first novel that will never see the light of day. And I learned more about writing, working with a mentor one-on-one than I think I have from just about any workshop or masterclass or class that I've done, just in having that one-on-one. But I gotta say, Sandy, I have spent so much money on my writing over the years. This may be my debut novel, but it's actually the fourth novel that I've written. Mm-hmm. And my memoir was published by Pan Macmillan back in 2013. And I wrote a sequel to that they didn't pick up, so I self-published it. So I've been writing for a long time. So I've managed to accrue a lot of money in the red as far as my writing's concerned. But with this book, The Last of the Apple Blossom, I knew it was worth spending some extra money on. And I thought, do I get a manuscript assessment? Do I get a mentor? I'm not sure. And I'm a member of the Australian Society of Authors, and I was looking through the options they have there. And the idea for The Last of the Apple Blossom came to me the very same day I had interviewed Monica McInerney for The Trip of a Lifetime. And we'd talked a lot about grief during that interview and how it informed her writing. And that afternoon, this idea for The Last of the Apple Blossom, which was probably one of the saddest ideas I've ever had, very unlike anything I'd written before. And starting on the day of the Tasmanian 1967 bushfires and tracing the demise of the apple industry in Tasmania, I was like, whoa, where's that come from? But even though it terrified me, I wrote it. And at about draft 4, I went, this is worth spending some extra money on. Mm-hmm. So on the ASA website, they have a list of mentors for their mentorship program. And I'm going through going, no, not a good fit, not a good fit, not a good fit. Monica McInerney is available for a mentorship. That's amazing. And so the whole thing kind of came full circle, because the day after I'd had the idea, the day after I'd interviewed her, I actually emailed her and said, Monica, I've had this idea for a book, but it's too big. It's too terrifying. I don't know if I can write it, and I blame you. And she went, oh, no, Mary Lou, it's all your own, and you must write it and stuff. So to go from there, 4 drafts down, and she actually wouldn't even look at it until I'd done 6 drafts.
Right.
And then she said, and I want you to do at least 10. And she was with me every step of the way, draft 6 to draft 10, and incredibly supportive and generous. Honestly, some of the best money I have ever spent in my life on anything.
It's an investment, isn't it, in your professional future, really. If you can afford it, it's a wonderful way to invest in yourself.
Yeah, and there was no way I was going to let this slide. I thought, even if I have to scrimp and save, I paid for as many hours as I can. With the ASA mentorship program, you can pay for as many hours as you can afford, really. So that's what I did. And I got to say, Monica she went way and beyond, really, what I'd actually paid for. She was just astounding. She gave me a thorough working out. She was a hard task mistress.
That's what you want, though.
She pulled this book apart. I wrote 30,000 extra words. I edited out another 15,000 that didn't work. There were parts in the book where she said, you need to give us the detail on this. And the other thing she did right from the start was, I want you to, in a separate document, nothing to do with your manuscript, this will not make it into the book, I want you to write the story of every single character in the book. Even Peter, the brother who dies in the fire, she wanted his complete story from birth until death. And she said, this will really give an extra depth to your book. So, yeah, it was a lot.
But definitely worth it, particularly if we can judge that on the end product. Totally worth it. Monica is one of the giants of women's commercial fiction, and I'm sure she's an influence to most of us writers. She certainly has been an influence on mine, not in a personal way, but as a reader. Was there anything that surprised you about working with Monica when you were going through these drafts and redrafting and editing and that sort of thing?
I think one of the things that did surprise me was one of the books that she suggested that I read, because that's the other thing. She gave me a reading list. And
like going back to university.
It was. I know. And I'm not going to mention one of the books because it's going to give away part of the plot. But she said you just need an extra layer of depth around this issue in the book. So I want you to read this. So yeah, I wasn't expecting a reading list, but I was going to do absolutely everything that Monica McInerney suggested. There was no way that I wasn't. And the other thing was just how many times she read this. Like I said, it was from draft 6 through to draft 10. And the ASA say, don't expect anything above and beyond the hours that you've paid for. But Monica's generosity, and I will say this, she is a massive supporter of other writers. It's just phenomenal. When she, because look, I've interviewed her a lot. I used to be an ABC presenter, so I've interviewed Monica a lot. We have a history that goes back to Dave Dott. And the first interview I did with her was a pre-recorded interview. So we got to chat afterwards. And we both discovered that we're from large families, and that we don't have children of our own, but we're really hands-on aunties. And so we kind of clicked. And so we'd kept in touch through all the years. And she really wanted to see some early pages of my memoir, which was a long time ago. And, she loved it. So even from way back then, she's been a supporter. When I hadn't written a word, I didn't have anything out there. And I know that with other authors, she's really supported them. She's helped them find agents and all kinds of stuff. So that depth of generosity I found surprising that she would go the extra mile, not just for me, but for a lot of debut authors and other authors that she supports as well. And I do love that about the writing community. And I don't know anything about it overseas, but here in Australia, it is very, very supportive. And especially in such times, it's really important.
It really is. And I remember last year when the pandemic first hit and we went into that first lockdown, Monica was spruiking books on her Facebook page, and I was one of the ones that she spruiked. And it meant so much to me that, we've never met, Monica and I, that she knew what it was, how it was going to impact authors who were releasing at the beginning of lockdown. And just purely out of generosity, she did that for so many authors last year. It was beautiful. We've got a few comments here regarding that. Tracy Anderson says that she loves that Australian authors are so generous with their support. Phil and Craig from Happy Valley. The Australian authors are the best in the world. It is true. It is such a beautiful community to be a part of. I'm just going to go through some more of the comments before I ask you my next question. Danny V is also watching. Hi, Danny. Helen Edwards is here. She bought your book yesterday, Mary Lou, and she is looking forward to reading it. Helen, I guarantee you will enjoy it. Joe Burke is joining us from South Australia. Wild and woolly apparently today. Nicole is here. Hi, Nicole. Jem McCusker is also here and says hello. Nicole Tebble says hello. Penelope Janu said it's a brilliant premise for a book. Yvonne Lockhurst is here. It's so lovely to see so many. It's because we're all stuck in lockdown, right? And Helen says you were very lucky to work with Monica. So much love for Monica amongst the reading community as well as the writing community.
I was so lucky. The thing is that when you do apply for a mentorship, a paid mentorship, I mean, the ASA have mentorships that you can apply for that you can get for nothing. But I'm just like, no, I want this mentorship. I'm going to pay for it. I want it now. And they give you a list of, or they give you 3 choices, your top 3 choices for a mentor. And I thought, no, the only one I want is Monica. So I emailed her and I said, right, I want to do this. And I imagine you have a waiting list as long as your arm. And what are my chances? And she went, no, absolutely. I'm there for you, Mary Lou. And so when I finally got around to, well, it was only the next day, I think, to actually applying for the mentorship, the ASA emailed me back and said, oh, we've already heard from Monica.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
It's happening. Yeah, in my life. We're calling this, mentors and angels, and she's both. She really is. She's a sensitive woman. And last year, because the Godmothers was affected by lockdowns as well.
Yes.
And so at very short notice, I was asked to step in to do a virtual interview with her for all of Southeast Queensland libraries. And so I did that. And then afterwards she said, Mary Lou, I want to return the favour. I will interview you when your book comes out, which is happening through Better Reading on the 18th. And it's going to be really weird because I've interviewed her so many times by her. It'll be hard for me to ask her questions. So
you remember you're wearing a different hat, Mary Lou.
I know. It's going to be lovely. But that's how generous she is. Just amazing.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Penny's shouting out to your backdrop, which is just gorgeous and goes beautifully with the book there that you've got. And Dixie Lee is joining us from Perth, and she says nearly all of the books she reads nowadays are Australian authors. Well, that pleases us no end, Dixie, to hear that.
Yeah. And I also bought this screen. I thought, otherwise you're just going to see a blank wall and a door behind me. So I bought a screen online. And then, when I was able to go and get some material, I shopped for some material in person and remade the panels here because I love this material. It's just gorgeous.
It's gorgeous. It's gorgeous indeed. Now, as you said, we're talking about mentors and angels today. And one of the angels that helped you actually call your apple angel, and that was Naomi, who is orchardist the right terminology? Yep. Excellent. And she helped you a lot with your research because the last of the apple blossom does take place in the apple orchards of Tasmania. How did you come to meet Naomi, and how did that relationship then blossom?
I love that use of the word blossom there, Sandy. It's beautiful.
I'm the best.
I did a lot of research for this book because when the idea came to me, I just went, what the hell? I mean, I remember the 1967 bushfires. I was a child in Tasmania. So the early chapters, the ones set at the school, and the last safe house on the mountain at Mount Nelson was our house. So that's pulled from my own memories of that day. But I really knew nothing about growing apples. Like most people in Tasmania, my dad grew a few apple trees in the backyard, but that was about it. So I did an enormous amount of research because not only was I researching apple growing, but I was researching apple growing in the 60s and 70s, and it has changed dramatically since then. So there are a lot of oral histories through the National Library of apple and pear growers, and I found one female orchardist, and she was in the Huon Valley, but she had passed away. And I really wanted to talk to a female orchardist. My protagonist, Catherine, she's determined to make the orchard viable again after the fires. It's the 60s. Her husband is dead set against it. Her brother was supposed to take over, but he perished in the fire. And I really wanted to know what it was like from a female orchardist's point of view. So I searched and I searched, and I finally found Naomi, who was Tasmanian Rural Woman of the Year back in the 90s. And I tracked her down and I cold called her. She didn't know me from a piece of cheese. And I said, have you got some time? I just need to ask you some questions. And she went, sure. I don't think she realised when she went, sure, that I had 3 foolscap pages of questions. I started asking her, and after a while she just laughed and she went, Mary Lou, you're not even going to need a third of this stuff in your novel. Turns out she was right.
Yep.
A lot of it got pulled out through the editing process. But she offered on that very first phone call when I came down to the Huon Valley to take me on a tour of the Huon Valley, of her orchard, the old packing sheds, the old cool rooms and stuff like that. She had one that her father had built, which was built the way they were built back then. Mm-hmm. And she said, I will introduce you to old orchardists in the area who lived through all of this, because Naomi and I are about the same age. So she was, 6 in 1967. But she said, there are old orchardists in the area that you're writing about who lived through it all. So when I went down there, it was just amazing. We'd buy all these gorgeous, cakes and buns and stuff from the bakery at Ranelagh and head off to see all these old orchardists. And she was fascinated too, because her orchard has been in her family for something like 6 generations. It was one of the very first orchards in the Huon Valley. So we were talking about the way that orchards used to be set up and how apples were grown. And we were in a part of the orchard, her orchard, that was very old, that was still set up that way. And some of the trees were 160 years old. It was just astounding. And the old ladders that they used to use, she still has those propped up against one of the trees. And she was so incredibly generous. And so both of us were actually spellbound by these stories from the old orchardists. And a couple of the stories that they told have made it into the book because they were so good. So good. I just went, okay, this is going in the book. And then after I had done 10 drafts, because I ended up doing 14, I said, will you fact check this for me? Sure. And so she did. She read the whole thing and she picked up on 2 things. One was about hail insurance that ended up getting edited out anyway. Yep. And there was one other very minor thing. And she said, you've done a great job. So that was a relief. It really was, because that was one of my really main concerns. Well, I had 2 main concerns about writing this book. One, I knew that people were still traumatised by the 67 bushfires, some people who went through it, and I really wanted to be respectful of that. And the other thing is, because I'm not an orchardist and I've never grown an apple tree, I wanted to get it right, because those old orchardists just went through so much and lost so much when England joined the common market and the whole industry just disappeared in 1973. And so I wanted to make sure that I got it right for them, because it's a real tribute to them. It really is, this book. Yeah. And Naomi,
you've actually dedicated the book to them.
Yeah, I have. The other thing I would just say that one of the oral histories I listened to, he said the line, I worked my entire life for nothing. And that really broke my heart, and it haunted me all the way through writing this book. When I was standing with Naomi in her orchard and she started, she was telling me about her life and how she kept the orchard going and viable, I went, hang on, is Brian Clark your dad? And she went, yes. And I went, I've listened to his oral history. He talks about you with such pride, at how hard you worked to keep the orchard going. And she didn't know that he'd done this interview, and she'd never heard it. And I asked her recently, have you listened to it yet? And she went, it would break my heart. It would break my heart because he passed away in 2009. So, but I felt like when we were in her orchard, and I felt a bit awkward because it's like, I know so much more about you because I've heard your dad talk about you in this oral history than I probably should know. But it was, it was a really touching moment and quite surreal. Yeah.
It is. And it just makes the book even more special that there is now this legacy and this tribute to those families. We've mentioned a few times the fires of 1967, and we're not giving anything away. We're not doing any spoilers because in the book these fires happen in the first few pages. So don't worry if you haven't grabbed a copy yet of Mary Lou's book. We're not spoiling anything by talking about them. What I wanted to ask you around that, and those opening chapters are so visceral when Catherine is trying to get back to her family orchard. To see how her family are faring in the middle of this raging inferno. What was it about the apple orchards from that particular point in history that drew you to the story? Because the fires would have affected not just the apple orchards, but a whole range of different people and families and industries at the time. What was it in particular about the apple industry that drew you to it?
I think it's because Tasmania is the apple isle. It used to be, not so much now. There are very, very few orchards left, but it was the apple isle. So for me, Tasmania, the 67 fires and apples were all intertwined. But to be quite honest, Sandy, when this idea first landed in my head, I just went, what the hell is that? Where did this come from? I had no desire at all up until that moment to write any books set in Tasmania where I grew up, and it was very much unlike any of the other books I had written. But I think it's probably because I was ready to write it, because I had written 3 other novels that had gone nowhere, that I had done so many classes and master classes and all that kind of stuff. I think that I was finally ready to write a book that has such depth and weight to it. I don't think I could have written it before, even though I'm 60 now. It's like, yeah, you're ready for this story, and that's why I think it landed. And in Big Magic, Elizabeth Gilbert says, when these ideas come rushing at you, you've got to kind of grab them and hold them. I did the opposite thing. This idea terrified me, and I wanted to run away from it, and it would not let me go. It just demanded to be written. It's just like, no, I don't care how scared you are. I don't care how terrified you are. You have to write this book. And I'm really glad I got over that fear, because it was fearsome fear. Yeah.
When that idea won't let you go, that's when you know you have to write it. Speaking of stories set in Tasmania, Tracy said that she hasn't read a book set in Tasmania yet, but she's very much looking forward to this one. Yvonne has it on order, and she's next in line from the library, which is fantastic, Yvonne. And Chrissy's is still in transit. You will love it, Chrissy, when you do get it. Now, we start in 1967 with the fires. It is an epic tale that goes right through to 1985, and then also towards the end in the present day. And you do cover 3 points of view throughout the novel, 3 main points of view. Catherine, who you've mentioned, who is the one trying to get back through the fires to her apple orchard, and the one that wants to continue the family's orchard against her father's wishes. Annie, her best friend, who's also running an orchard. And we also hear from Mark, one of the gentlemen that grew up in the same area. And I wanted to ask you, how did you balance all 3 of those points of view? And was there one that you wanted to hang out with more and had to pull yourself back from to go back to the others? Or did you find that all 3 of them got equal time in your head?
I will say that it really turned out to be Catherine's story more than anyone else's, even though it couldn't work. If any of the 3 were missing, this story would not work. But we start with Catherine, we end with Catherine, and her journey, I think, is probably the most interesting one. She's a young teacher at the beginning, and then she tries to step into her dead brother's shoes. to revive the orchard, and she's just met with resistance. And this was such an interesting time for young women, whereas Annie is married to an orchardist. She has 6 children, and she's estranged from her wealthy family because she married an orchardist and not some, rich guy from Hobart or someone who had wheat and sheep and lots of money.
Yeah.
So she has her own very heart-wrenching story as well. But Catherine, I think, embodied all the changes that were happening around women at that time. 66 was the year the marriage bar was lifted. So if she wanted to get married, she could still keep working. But if she got pregnant, she would have to quit her job. And then we have equal pay for women coming in very slowly, drip-fed over years. I have a little mention of her reading The Female Eunuch later on, which really kind of helps her take the step that she needs to. She can't get a bank loan without a husband or a father's permission. She doesn't have a husband, and her father certainly is not going to give his permission. And also the pill, which became available, but it was hideously expensive and only available to married women. And then we get into the Gough Whitlam years, and he changed all that. And he was the first Prime Minister to have an office for women, So the changes for women were massive during this time. And I didn't actually realise it when I started writing it, but through the process I really want to show these changes through the eyes of Catherine, who is affected by them all in every aspect of her life.
Yeah, I find it really fascinating. It's not that long ago. 1967 is not that long ago. You were around. I wasn't quite around, but not too far into the future I was around. So we're talking about living memory here, when women weren't allowed to get loans, and the marriage bar and all of those things. It blows my mind every time I read a story that's set in our lifetime, essentially, where things were so very different for women. Some could argue that things still have a long way to go. It's a fascinating period of time when we're looking at women from those late 60s, early 70s, and you've done such a good job of exploring that in this book as well.
Yes, it's just kind of drip fed in just little bits because it's life. So it's just what she experiences. It's not as if I'm on my high horse going, it's just like, well, when I was researching the book, I'm going, and that, and that, and that. And I've had feedback from early readers saying, well, I couldn't get a loan all through the 70s. I wasn't allowed to get a credit card even without my husband or father's consent in the early 80s.
In the 80s?
Oh, really? Yeah. So it was interesting exploring all that. But I will say, Sandy, that change across the board was massive in that time. So Tasmania was the first state to bring in daylight saving because it was so reliant on hydroelectricity, and it was in drought. There was no water, so you wouldn't have power. So they brought in daylight saving before any of the other states, so that people, it would be later until people turn their lights on and all that kind of stuff. You have the whole metric system coming in. Yes. So everything is changing. The decimal currency has just come in and people are still getting used to that. So you have money, time, weight, volume, distance, speed, everything is changing. And then you have massive events like the moon landing, the Vietnam War through this as well. And I just went, wow. It was such a time of change and turbulence. And I found it, though, really interesting that when I was editing The Last of the Apple Blossom, the Black Summer was happening 2019, 2025, and there were so many similarities between 67 and 2020. It was shocking to me. And also it was with England joining the common market and the export trade disappearing, so many of our primary producers and other producers with the sanctions by China, and then everyone kind of losing their jobs and things disappearing reminded me last year of, and into this year, sadly, of, the whole pandemic and people having to reinvent and pivot, which is exactly what my protagonists do. because to be quite honest, I was actually despairing of ever being able to find a happy ending. But people who know me know that I'm a great meditator, and I went off to a 10-day silent meditation retreat. And when I was supposed to be, calming my mind down, it came up with a happy ending.
Excellent. Sometimes we do need to just step away from the work, don't we, to sort out those little knots that we can't quite undo. So we've got sorry, Mary.
I was just going to say, for any writer going on a silent 10-day meditation retreat, if you've got writer's block or you're stuck on something, your mind will it'll come up, because you cannot shut your mind down. And if you're not doing anything but meditating, all these ideas just come up to the surface. It's phenomenal. It really is.
Just a couple more comments here. Jessie has reserved it from her library as well. Craig and Phil can't wait till theirs arrives. And Tracy's referring to the 60s and 70s, saying that there was a lot going on at that time. I'm going to pop up the contact details where you can find Mary Lou online. So if anyone's got any last questions they would like to ask her, pop them into the comments section now. Now, something that I've noticed on your social media, Mary Lou, and I'm going to blame you for my lockdown pounds that have crept up. There's an awful lot of lovely baking with apples that you do on your social media. The skein one that was up this week, I definitely want to try that one. Were you always fascinated by apples, or did the book lead you into this?
I have lovely memories because my dad did grow apples, so he had about 4 apple trees, I think. So I actually have lovely memories of him sitting by the fire, peeling apples and cutting them up, and Mum stewing them up, and then I would help from a very young age to make the apple crumble topping. And and apples were just part of our life. For anyone growing up in Tasmania, they were just a massive part of your life. But when I started writing this book, I became more and more fond of just cooking with apples and wanting to buy apples and wanting to support primary producers. I have such a massive respect for primary producers after writing this book and all the research, everything that gets thrown at them. I just think, so much you can't control, the weather and bureaucracy and economics. I just think, bless you all. So I buy a lot of apples and a lot of fruit and other vegetables and stuff like that. And every time I think, thank you for doing this for us, for putting up with so much and working so hard. So, yeah, I wanted to buy a lot of apples and I eat a lot fresh. My favourite lunch, I just had it, is an apple with cheese, and I just love that. But I really wanted to cook a lot with apples. And, have I got it here? I do. This is a little book that was put out many years ago. It's this is the 15th edition, and it was originally put out in southern Tasmania. It has lots of photos of the old orchards in the Huon Valley. It has an apple growing calendar. It has information on lots of different apples in the back. And I did actually use some of the information in this book in writing The Last of the Apple Blossom. And it's got fantastic recipes in here. The old homemade stuff that I grew up with, and some interesting ones I've never tried. So, yeah, I love this book.
Fantastic. If you're not already following Mary Lou on her social media, I would recommend it just for the apple recipes, if nothing else.
And I'll mention it's Book of the Month on the Bookstack Facebook group, and they asked me to write 5 recipes. So throughout the month, they'll be posting my recipes up on that Facebook group, which is lovely. Yeah.
We've got a question here from Chrissy. Before I get to Chrissy's question, she's mentioned that she feels like she needs to meditate right now to unlock her writer's block. Jo Burke is very much looking forward to reading this one. Tasmania has a special place in her heart. Chrissy's question is, how much did your living knowledge of the 1960s affect your research? Did you find any discrepancies in your memories versus the facts? That's an interesting question, Chrissy.
Look, it's a very interesting one, and I think when it came to the bushfires, anyone who's been through a bushfire, no matter how young you were, and I was 6, so I do remember it very clearly. You will never forget it. You'll never forget what that sky looked like. You will never forget what that sun looked like. And as our home was the last safe house on the mountain, and the lounge room full of kids, the worried mothers in the kitchen, and their dads up the hill trying to fight the fires with wet gunny sacks and garden hoses, and no one knowing if they'd have homes or dads to go home to. So all of that was very clear in my mind. However, when I mentioned it to one of my brothers, he went, "No, actually, it wasn't the last safe home house on the mountain." And I said, "Well, why was everyone at our place?" And you could actually get, half a bend, because Mount Nelson, if anyone knows it, in Hobart, there's bend 1 through to bend 7, and we were down the bottom of bend 1. He said you could get up halfway up bend 1. And I went, "Nah, I don't remember that." So we had to agree to disagree with that. He's older than me, so his memory is probably better. But the other thing is talking to people and listening to the oral histories of that time was really important to me. And because I didn't grow up on an orchard, I didn't really have any memories. I mean, we used to go down there for school excursions all the time to visit the orchards and the cool stores and the packing sheds and all that kind of stuff. And when I was young, I did spend a summer holiday on an orchard in the north of the state. But I really didn't get much of a sense of it, although the smell will never leave me, especially in the cool rooms and the packing sheds. It's this really overpowering smell of apples.
Nice.
And so, yeah, it was nice to be able to get those details in. And I was really fortunate in that, I don't know if it's the right word, but 2017 was the 50th anniversary of the 67 fires, and so a lot more information came out. There were a lot of people, video stories, written stories, and all that kind of stuff. Because when I was down the Huon interviewing people, they went, "There's no way anyone could have got back from Hobart to the Huon Valley."
Right.
That, it would not have happened. It was impossible. But I found one story from all the stuff that was put up during 2017 online of this guy who did. He was playing country cricket up in Hobart, and he was determined to get back down, and he actually gave the details of how he got back. So that's how I have Catherine getting back. I used those details so she could actually get back to the Huon Valley. And no one can say to me, "You couldn't do that," because I can go, "I did."
Excellent. Love it when we find those little gems. Now, for anyone who's watching this back later, because this will be available on my Facebook, Bookworm TV's Facebook, and my YouTube channel forever after we finish our little chat. If you pop in any questions in the comments, we can pop back in later and ask them if you have any burning questions that you would like to ask Mary Lou or myself. Do go out and grab a copy of The Last of the Apple Blossom, and I hope that you'll fall in love with Catherine and Annie and Mark's story the way I did. It's very beautifully written, and I've said this only a couple of times. It's hard to find a story that's not only beautifully written but is a cracking good story as well, and you've definitely achieved that in The Last of the Apple Blossom. Thank you so much for joining me today, Mary Lou. One last comment from Rosemary, who says she loves the way that you researched and the experiences that you used. Thank you for joining us. Before I let you go, what are you working on next?
Well, that's an interesting question. I was kind of a little bit put out, I guess, that I only got a 1-book deal, and now I'm incredibly grateful because I'm going through exactly the same process as I did with The Last of the Apple Blossom, and I'm really relieved I don't have a deadline hanging over me. Honestly, Sandy, I don't know how you do it. I don't know anyone who does a book a year does it. I have so much admiration for people, for writers who are able to do a book a year. I just think I would just collapse. So I've realised it's part of my process. With my memoir, I was terrified of writing it and put it off for years because I was told that I had to be really, really honest to write it, and I wasn't quite ready. With The Last of the Apple Blossom, I was terrified to write it. It really scared me. And the same thing has happened with this latest book, which is again set in Tasmania. And I have this thing that I actually can't really engage or write a story until I find its deep melancholy heart.
Sure.
And I have found this with this one, and the deep melancholy is actually about the drowning of Lake Pedder, which was a completely unique lake in Tasmania. And it got flooded by the Hydroelectric Commission in between 72 and 73. That's when it was completely inundated. And it did break a lot of people's hearts. On the flip side of that, the Green Party was birthed out of that. The first political Green Party in the world came out of the drowning and the protests about that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I'm looking at the moment. And I hope I find a happy ending for that one too.
I'm sure you will. I'm sure you will. Even if it takes another meditation retreat, I'm sure you will find the happy ending. Thank you so much again, Mary Lou, and thank you to everybody who joined in. Stay safe, everybody. It's tough times at the moment for a lot of us. Hang in there and reach out to your friends if you need help. And I will see you in a fortnight on Friday Book Bites. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Sandy. Appreciate it.